A large story beat in Horimiya is Miyamura's physical transformation. This change results in him looking like a completely different character from some weird loner emo nerd into kind of a preppy boy. It's actually so prevalent that classmates who used to make fun of him start to take an interest in him, and girls actually kind of start flirting with him. A character's change in physical appearance is often how an author chooses to visually display to viewers or readers a change in the character themselves, some kind of growth in their arc. So what if I told you that Miyamura's new look is more than just his new friends influencing his fashion choices? What if I told you that his new look is actually a beautiful depiction of a boy who struggled with self-harm, learning to express himself in a more healthy manner? I'm Angel, I'm a licensed therapist, and today I want to talk about how the show Horimiya depicted Miyamura's struggle with self-harm and his journey to healing from it. Miyamura spent a lot of his childhood alone. He was an only child and he didn't really have many friends in elementary and middle school. He was also bullied relentlessly for this shy demeanor. This wasn't helped by an incident in middle school where a classmate who was responsible for feeding the class bunny forgot to do it, resulting in the bunny dying, and decided to blame it on Miyamura, which only furthered his isolation. Miyamura's shyness and soft-spoken manner, along with the incident with the rabbits, really led to his classmates viewing him as gloomy, depressing, and a weird loser. As far as they were concerned, he was someone to avoid. This bullying and isolation from his classmates caused Miyamura to develop really low self-worth, experience a lot of emotional distress, and feel extremely lonely. Miyamura struggled a lot to express his intense emotions, as children and adolescents often do. Part of this is neurobiological, with studies such as McCrae et al.'s fMRI analysis of cognitive reappraisal in children, adolescents, and young adults actually finding that an individual's ability to reframe or reinterpret an upsetting situation to decrease its emotional impact improves with age. Another part of this is social. Wiley, DeFrance, and Hollenstein conducted a study that analyzes how adolescents may or may not express their emotions differently depending on the social context. They found that adolescents use less suppression when they're alone and when they're with parents that they feel close to. However, regardless of closeness, they actually use more suppression around their friends. This makes a lot of sense considering the negative connotation socially that there is with expressing negative emotions. Also, adolescents give really high importance to the way their peers view them. So the negative connotation there is to expressing negative emotions really makes suppressing them an attractive thing to do and as a way to survive in the social landscape that we have in our society currently. Miyamura struggles throughout the show to express his emotions to others, which is something that's a huge part of his character arc as he's learning to do so with his newfound friends. When individuals hold in all their emotions with no way to express or regulate them, that aggression that they feel often switches from being externalized to something that is internalized. It's turned inward, and they're usually aggressive more so towards themselves. One common way that this occurs and that you might see this is through the use of non-suicidal self-injury, also known as self-harm. During middle school, when Miyamura was experiencing social isolation and bullying, he actually pierced himself. And I'm not over here talking like 1 or 2 piercings with a piercing gun or with a sterilized needle. No. Miyamura has 9 piercings that he did with safety pins. 4 on each ear, and then he's got 1 piercing on his lip. That's an excessive amount of piercings, even for someone to have done professionally, but to do them yourself really indicates something else. It seems like there are implications here that he was doing it due to the emotional distress from the social isolation and the bullying. Non-suicidal self-injury or self-harm is when a person intentionally harms themselves through cutting, burning, scratching, hitting, headbanging sometimes is one, without any suicidal intent. Self-harm is a coping mechanism that's often used by individuals who experience extremely intense emotions and really don't have the skills to regulate them as kind of a way to quiet the mind and calm themselves down. It makes them feel better, even if just for a second, because of the endorphins that are released. Endo et al. Actually found that a preference for solitude, as well as being socially isolated, put adolescents at the highest possible risk for engaging in self-injury. And we already know that Miyamura is quite a lonely child. He's socially isolated, and he does seem to have a preference for having few friends, being on his own. He seems to be a bit more of an introvert. Wang et al. Also found that emotional dysregulation, as well as adverse childhood experiences such as bullying and social isolation like Miyamura experienced, increase one's chances of engaging in self-harm. So now that we've talked a little bit about Miyamura's past, his experiences engaging with self-injury, how it kind of started, where this is coming from, I want to talk about the catalyst for change. I want to talk about the healing journey and where it started. And it really starts with when he meets Hori. When Hori learned about Miyamura's piercings, she didn't react with disgust or reproach. She approached the situation with empathy, with genuine curiosity. Hori was pretty well able to piece together that the piercings were a form of self-harm, but she never ever judged Miyamura for it. She never saw him as his piercings or as his scars, as his self-injury. He was just Miyamura, and the piercings were a part of him. Wu et al. Actually did a study that looked into the correlation between peer acceptance and self-harm among a sample of Chinese students. What this study found is that increased peer support is actually a very, very important part of recovering from self-injury for specifically adolescents. Forrest et al. Also did a study on the impact of peer support and social supports on suicidal ideation and self-injury. This study found that peer and teacher support promoted positive outcomes and that the protective effects of having social support increased the more social support one has. So think not just having friends, but having more sources, teachers, other mentors, parents, things along those lines. And what these two studies indicate and how this really correlates here is that having social support as a resource is vital in individuals recovering from self-injury and from suicidal ideation. Suicidal ideation and self-injury often coincide. They're often something that you'll find people with together. And a lot of that is because self-injury really is just a coping mechanism. It is just a way that somebody is currently coping with the world around them and trying to learn how to function when things are really difficult. It's like a survival technique. It's not an attempt to die. They're actually doing it because they don't want to die. They want to continue living. There's just this unbearable pain. And that pain is only relieved through the use of self-injury. Before meeting Hori, Miyamura really didn't show the piercings to anybody. He pretty much hid them from the world, especially when he was at school. Like when he was out of school, he didn't really worry about hiding them, probably because he knew he wouldn't be recognized. But by showing them to her, having someone else know that this is something that he's done, something that's a part of him, it kind of took the power away from that. It took the power away from the piercings. They simply became a trait that he had. It wasn't Miyamura did this to himself, and this is a huge part of who he is. It was just Miyamura has some piercings that he gave himself in middle school. Hori showing no judgment and approaching it with the curiosity and the openness and the kindness that she did was the first step in Miyamura learning to open up to others and healing from his self-injury. Self-injury thrives in secrecy. There is a lot of incentive to hide what you are doing when you are self-injuring for a multitude of reasons. First off, there's a lot of stigma. Like, stigma is probably the biggest one. Our society views self-injury as something that only crazy people do or people who are attention-seeking. And so when people find out that you're doing it, your social view is really not gonna be helped at all. You might actually become more isolated. Further, this might feel like the one coping mechanism an individual has, the one thing that no one can take from them, that they have control over in their lives. And most people who engage in self-injury understand that they shouldn't. They understand that it is unhealthy to some degree, or that socially it is viewed as unhealthy. So by not telling anyone that you're doing it, no one's ever gonna make you stop, and you can keep engaging and you can hang on to this coping mechanism that you have. And that is why it is so, so important that if you are engaging in self-harm, if you are hurting yourself, that you let someone know, that you tell someone. That is the first step to recovery, because once someone knows, then they can start to help you find some help. We can figure out what the root causes are, and they can hold you accountable for recovering from it, because there's a lot of accountability that comes with recovering from self-injury and learning to use those healthier coping mechanisms. So now I want to talk specifically about Miyamura's transformation and what this represents for his recovery. One of the biggest transformations is his haircut. His hair previously covered his ears, so you couldn't see the piercings, but when he cuts it and he goes through this physical transformation, now you can see them all, and they're noticeable. They're commented on by his classmates. Miyamura's hair acted kind of as a safety blanket for him. It hid these scars. It hid the piercings. A lot of people who self-harm will hide their scars under long sleeves, long pants. They'll go out of their way to make sure that nobody sees them. And when people do, if somebody points it out, usually they get very self-conscious about it. However, when Miyamura decides to cut his hair shorter, he takes the first step necessary in accepting his past, making peace with it, and opening himself up to the people around him, giving them the opportunity to accept him rather than further socially isolate him as he's assumed that they're going to do. He tosses the shield that was his hair aside, not necessarily because he doesn't need it anymore, because he doesn't want it anymore, but because he wants to decide to try and allow people in. He's making the decision to let others in, to be more open with the people around him, and to give them the opportunity to love him and accept him for who he is, rather than assuming automatically that they're just going to abandon him or think he's crazy. At this point in the show, he has come to realize that the self-imposed isolation that he's engaging in is contributing to his depression, and he no longer wants to engage in that. He wants to accept himself, to stop running from his past, to make peace with what happened, and feel free to just be himself, scars and all. This isn't really touched upon in the show, but in the manga it's touched upon that Miyamura's piercings begin to close eventually. This is because he's not really wearing them as frequently as piercings usually do. If you have any piercing on your body, you know it can close up if you don't put anything in it. This is really indicative of a decrease in the urge to engage in self-injury. Oftentimes people who have self-harmed in the past find that when their circumstances get better and as their mental health gets better, not self-harming becomes a lot easier, that the urges decrease and sometimes completely are eliminated. Which speaks really heavily to the fact that self-harm is just a coping mechanism. It is something people are doing when they're in extremely difficult and dysregulating situations. There are actually a lot of people who don't even really realize that they've stopped self-harming. They just kind of wake up one morning and realize that they haven't done it in a really long time and that they haven't really had the urge to and they don't really care to. When Miyamura revealed that his piercings were closing in the manga, that indicated to me that he was going through this, that he was realizing, oh, I haven't really had the urge to do this in a long time. I haven't really thought about this much. It's becoming less a part of him. It revealed that he was getting a lot better at using those more healthy and adaptive coping skills, such as communicating his feelings with others. A lot of people find that their self-injury is actually something that they identify with heavily, that is something that feels like a part of them, and I think that that was very true for Miyamura for a while, that his piercings and his tattoos and, his different appearance was a part of who he was. It's kind of a part of your identity. And when you're an adolescent, you're already struggling to find a self-concept. A lot of adolescents have little to no self-concept, their egos are quite fragile, and they're still trying to figure out what they're doing in life. And when you're already struggling with emotional dysregulation or a lot of adverse experiences, some kind of trauma such as abuse or bullying, you might find that when you're engaging in something like self-injury, that becomes a part of your identity, especially if you've done it for a long period of time and it started in developmental or formative years. But instead of doing all this, Miyamura learns to communicate his feelings and what's going on with him to the people around him and lean on them for support. He realizes that these people are not going to abandon him. It's something he's really worried about at the beginning of the show. And that they accept him for who he is. That most of them probably have figured out, if they know that he gave himself the piercings and they know much about his past, that he did this to himself and this likely has something to do with depression or self-injury, but they don't care. They don't view him for that. They view him as the person he is right now. That's just a part of his story. And so by the end of the series, Miyamura really isn't wearing the piercings anymore. The tattoos aren't something that's brought up very frequently. His appearance has completely changed, and this represents that he's learned better emotion regulation skills and developed a stronger self-concept. Before I wrap everything up, I really want to talk about how important I think it is and how much I appreciate that it's a male character depicted engaging in self-injury and struggling with depression. Oftentimes the media really depicts these issues as things that only women struggle with, and while it is very true that women are more likely to be self-injuring and be found to be doing these things, women are far more likely to be diagnosed with a mental health problem or a mental health concern. Men are actually far more likely to complete suicide though. I personally don't think that this is because women for some reason just are more prone to mental illness and more prone to self-injury. I think a lot of it is due to social factors and socialization. It's a lot more acceptable for a woman to express her negative emotions and to express emotional struggles than it is for a man to. And self-injury is already highly stigmatized, but it's even more stigmatized when we're talking about males. So having characters like Miyamura who struggle with these very, very stigmatizing things like depression and self-injury, especially as a male, really is impactful for young men and adolescent boys who might be dealing with this. It shows them not only that this is something that people struggle with and you're not alone, but it shows them that it can get better. We see Miyamura's journey, we see his transformation, and we see his recovery. It gives them a light, a little bit of hope to look for, and for all you know, it could be the reason that someone decides to reach out for help. Horimiya is one of the best depictions that I have seen of self-harm and what recovery can look like for a person. It depicts very well how social isolation, adverse experiences such as bullying, and poor emotional regulation skills can lead someone to engaging in self-injury as a way to cope. It also displays how vital acceptance, openness, and social support are in recovering from self-harm. Miyamura's transformation is a very powerful illustration of the process of recovering from social isolation and from self-injury, the process of bringing it into the light, the process of opening yourself up to others when for so long you've run from them and you've hidden from them out of fear of being judged and rejected. I hope you were able to learn something, and I hope that you found this video interesting. If you watched it all the way through, if you haven't watched Horimiya, I highly recommend that you look into it. It's a really, really good show, even outside of the self-injury storyline with Miyamura. All of the sources that I talked about, I'm gonna link down below, so if you want to read a little bit more about them, I really highly encourage it. These are some pretty interesting studies, and self-injury is something that is far too common among adolescents, so learning about this and understanding it, understanding the protective factors, the risk factors, understanding what's going on, can help you to either prevent your child, your friend, or yourself from being at risk for this, or it can help you to intervene if it's already happening. Remember, we want to be accepting, we want to be loving, and we want to encourage people to come out and talk about this. We don't want to judge them for struggling with something like this. It really, really is a very difficult thing to recover from, and it's not something someone does just willy-nilly. You're not doing this for attention usually, and if you are, then there's something more going on. Because why is that what you need to do to get somebody's attention? Ramble about self-injury over. I engage with a lot of patients that are struggling with self-injury or have struggled with self-injury, so this is very, very close to my heart. And again, I really appreciate seeing a male depicted to be struggling with something that usually is reserved for female characters. Bye.